All right, hi there. Today we're going to be talking about the Array.from static method. Now, the basic functionality of Array.from is something you can explain in about 30 seconds, and I will do that, but there's a lot more going on behind the scenes here, and there's a bunch of other things that are related. So there's additional parameters that come with the Array.from method. So we're going to talk about what those additional parameters do. We're going to talk about what it means when they say in the documentation that it accepts an array-like or an iterable argument being passed in. So I'll explain what those are. We'll talk about how we can turn something that's not iterable into something that is iterable so we can use it within this method, as well as a few practical examples of where you could use Array.from. Okay, so I have a very basic web page here. We've got a few paragraphs, and in my script that's loading, all I'm doing is I'm going to find all the paragraphs on the page. That is going to be my iterable object. So this is a node list. It's not an array, but I want to turn it into an array because there's methods that I want to use on it, which are only allowed to be used on arrays. And my second thing is this object. I want to be able to use the Array.from method on here to be able to extract those values. So taking a look at this, if I log out what paras is, and I want to see what the type of this, it's going to come back and say that it's an object. If we want to find out what is the type of object this is, what we can do here is paras.constructor. This is what was the function that JavaScript used to create this thing. So when this method ran, what was the kind of object that it built? Go inside of here. So it is an object. This is the type of, and then node list. That is what we have here. So I've got, if you're not familiar with it, I've got the live server extension running in VS Code. Down here you can see I'm currently running live server. That's what's going up here. We've got localhost port 5500 running our page. Now, this paras.constructor says that it is a node list, which is an array-like thing. So it has index numbers. There are 4 paragraphs. If we were to say log out paras, it's not an array, but if we look at it here, it kind of looks like an array. Square brackets, item 0, 1, 2, 3. It looks a lot like an array, but it is a node list. So similar properties, but it doesn't have all the methods that array has. It has a for each method. I could do this. I could say paras.forEach, and for each paragraph inside there, we'll just do console.log or log p.innerText. Let's take a look at the content inside of it. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. We looped through the node list and did this. So that's available whether you're an array or you're a node list. That was added, I can't remember now, back around 2016, they added that functionality into the node list. Before that, you had to absolutely convert it into an array before you could. But with this, we can do it. But if I try something else, like the map method will loop through an array and it creates a brand new array based on the items that were in the original. So we're going to call a function once for every time we iterate, just like for each, but we're returning something. So instead of logging, what you would do is say, I want to return p.textContent or p.innerText, and this is going to be my new array. Do something like that, but it doesn't work. There is no map method. Arrays have a map method, but node lists do not. So this is where one of the practical examples comes in. We want to be able to treat this thing as if it were an array. So simple enough. I will create my variable and call the Array.from method. Now this is a static method, meaning when you write it, you have to use the word array here. This isn't a variable. This is the array data type. So with a capital A, array, inside that object there is a method called from, and we pass in the iterable or array-like structure. So what is that? Well, node list, that looked a lot like an array. We saw that it had a length property. There was index values showing item 0, 1, 2, 3. So this is an iterable object. I can pass in paras, and that's going to work just fine. And if all you need to do is create a shallow copy of your paragraph, of your array, your iterable structure, this works. So I could have another array that I passed in here and create a copy of it, a shallow copy, or I can have an iterable object, create a shallow copy of that. This works just fine. So that is the 30-second explanation, is just this right here. Okay, I need to copy an array. This is a way to do it. So there we have it. We've created an array, and this is actually an array from our node list. So that's the simple one. Now, additional parameters that can be passed in here. You can also pass in a function. So you can see here in the notes, map function. This is actually calling the array map method. So I'm taking this thing, turning it into an array, and then I'm calling the array map method on it. So if we want to extract, let's say I want to get the HTML tag name for each one of these things. I'm going to call this function, and I'm going to return p.localName. And now, because I have this function embedded inside of here, what's coming back into here is not this object, or the array built from this, but it's the array built from this function. So I'm going to have an array that has the letter P 4 times. There we are. So no longer is it the P element, this is just the string P, because that's the tag name. So I can see here local name, or if I use tag name, I'll get the uppercase version of that. There's the uppercase P's. So it's no longer just here without the quotation marks. Those are the elements. I'm saying, no, I want the HTML tag for these. So these are now strings. That's the first argument that we can add in here. So we can say, take this iterable object, turn it into an array, and run this function, just like array.map. So run the array.map method on the array that was created from this, and that is what's going to be returned, the result of this array.map. All right, so that's the second argument. Now, going on to objects. Objects are not iterable. So here, I'm going to comment these lines out just so we don't see them showing up. What I want to do is the same type of thing. Let's say I'm going to create another array, and I want to build it from my object. There we are. So I've got 3 things inside of here. I want to loop through it. I want to create an array that has these 3 values, these 3 strings, the ID, the name, and the email address. And no errors on the page. But if I log this out, I get an empty array. So it is an array, but it's got length 0. None of the items were actually passed in. So there's nothing syntactically wrong here. I haven't mistyped anything. It's just that when you have an object literal, or some other object that you've created, it doesn't mean that it's iterable. It doesn't have index numbers. I can't say, hey, in the object, what is at position 0? What is at position 1? What is at position 2? Because those things don't exist. I have something called ID, something called name, something called email, but I don't have something called 0 or 1 or 2, and something that's iterable, that is position 0, 1, 2. So this gave us back an empty array. It worked. It called the Array.from method on this, but there was nothing iterable, so we were left with an empty array that was returned by this. All right, now, how do I turn this into something that is actually iterable? Well, we can extend the object. We can say, I want to add my own iterator. My object that I'm creating up here, I'm going to access its iterator property, or I'm going to create a property on the object, which is an iterator. So it is a function, and this function needs to return an object. And this object that it's returning is the iterator. Inside my iterator object, I need to have a method called next. When you do a for of loop, when you're doing for each or map, and you're iterating through the object, what's happening internally is this method, next, is being called once for each item inside your array or inside your iterable object. Up here, this node list is iterable, which means it has inside of it an iterator property, and you can say, hey, give me the next thing, give me the next thing, give me the next thing. Inside of here, I'm going to return an object, and the object that gets returned by next has to have two properties. It's got to have a property called value, and it's got to have a property called done. This is going to be the actual value, saying, okay, I'm item 0, item 1, item 2, item 3. For each one of those, give me the value, one at a time, and then done is either true or false. When it gets to the end, when there's nothing more to be iterated over, this will be set to true, and then that tells the for each loop, you're done. You don't need to iterate anymore. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to iterate over this specific object. This is where I'm setting my iterator. I will say these are my iterable props, we'll call them. There is a property called ID. There's a property called name, not iname, but name. And there's a property called email. Those are the things that I want to iterate over, and I want to keep track of how many times I've iterated. So I'll create a variable called index, and I'll set it to 0. This is going to be the first thing that I'm iterating over. Here's number 0, here's number 1, here's number 2. I'm just going to go through this array, and inside of my next method, the value that I'm going to return is going to be equal to object and whatever the value of iterable props number index is. So index will be 0. Item 0 from here is the ID. So what is the ID of object? That's what I'm going to put into value, and that's what I'm going to return right here. So value is value, or you can just use the shorthand and just write value. And then the done, well, I'm going to be done when I've got my index up to value 4 here. So I'm beyond the end of this. So we'll increment our index like that. And for done, I'm just going to return if index is equal to iterable props.length plus 1. Because when it gets to, I've got 0, 1, 2, I don't want to stop here. I don't want to send true. I want to make sure that I get this final thing. So I have to add 1 onto the end there. So I am actually gone beyond the end of this. All right, so we have added our own custom iterator to the object, which means now this is going to work. So if I copy this part, paste it down here, now I can actually do that. There it is. There's the 3 values, the ID, the name, and the email. I'm getting all 3 of those values. I'm iterating over the object because I've added an iterator. So we can do the same thing as we were doing up here before. We can have the array from, and we can also add a little method on the end. So the second parameter is that function. So let's say A2 is going to be equal to Array.from. We're going to iterate over our object. And instead of just taking the values from there, what I want to do is I'm going to say this function will be, I'm going to look at if the val includes an @ sign. So if the value coming from here includes an @ sign, I know I'm looking at the email property. And if that is the case, I'm going to return null, else I will return the value. So I'm going to I should get a null in place of the email address. A2, I will get the ID, I will get the name. There's the ID, there's the name, but the email, the third property, is set to null because there was an @ sign inside of there. So here's a practical application of Array.from. If you've got a custom iterator, you can be iterating through any object you want. You just have to write the logic to step through the properties. But with that, you can add this method to look at each one of the properties individually. Now I've done a pretty simple example here. I'm just setting to null if it's an email address, but you could apply any logic that you want and modify the content of your array, your iterable object, looking at the properties inside of each one of those. Now there is one other property as well that we can pass into the Array.from. It can be just the iterable object or an iterable object and a function, or you can also add a third parameter, which is the this reference. Okay, so what is the this reference? Let's do this. We've got our array and our object. The object is now iterable. So that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop through here and I'm going to create a function, and the function is just like a for each or the map function. It is the map function. The item and the index are going to be the two things that we get passed in here. And then the third parameter right here that comes after the function is the this. What do you want to use as the value of the keyword this inside here? Now by default, this is going to, if you're using a regular function, not an arrow function, inside of arrow functions, it changes the values of this. So using a regular function here, this will refer to obj. So if I said this dot something, it's going to be talking about the object that we're, or the array that we're creating here. Now, here, I'm going to pass in paras. So that is our original node list from up here. So this iterable object, which was our node list, I'm passing that into here. Here, let me comment these out just to clear that up. Inside of here, we could just return item, and then this paras is doing nothing at all. It's not changing anything, not being used. It's serving no purpose. So there we go. There's the three values that were inside of our iterable object. But instead of just returning that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at each one of the values. So if this dot index, this is the paras. So I'm saying, okay, if this thing has item number 0, item number 1, item number 2. So this is the index coming from here. So this is, as I'm looping through the object, I've got numbers 0, 1, and 2. I don't have a 3. Paras does, but I'll never get to that. But I want to check and see. If it does have that, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return this index. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at paras, and I'm returning that as I loop through object. There we go. The 3 paragraphs, the first 3 paragraphs is what's being returned. Even though I'm looping through the object, this is the thing that I'm iterating through. This is what I'm using as the keyword this. So inside of here, if that exists, what I'm going to do, I'm going to return an object, and I'm going to use item as the key, and then this index dot inner text. This is a paragraph element. I want its text, and I just want to get the first word from that. So I'm going to call split, and everywhere there's a space, we'll split it apart, and then I want the very first thing from that array, so I call shift. There we go. So this is going to be the first word from the array that was created by splitting the text inside the paragraph on every space. So I've got here, from my object, I'm getting those values. I'm using those as the keys in my object. And if it doesn't exist, so if this index doesn't exist, then I'm going to return item, which will be this thing. So let's look at these. and here they are. So there's 3 things in my array. I was using Array.from to loop through it. I'm creating 3 things because object had 3 things in it. And I'm creating 3 objects because those things did exist. Pairs did have 3 things at least. 1, 2, 3. And then the key is the value from the object, and the value is the first word, lorem maxime voluptatem. Now, if I were to change the page, just to demonstrate this, I'm going to actually remove the last 2 paragraphs. So there's only 2 paragraphs now. The length of this is 2, whereas the length of object is 3. Now, I should get 2 objects and 1 string. There it is. The 2 objects. 1 for the first because there was a paragraph. 1 for the second. There was a paragraph, so we got that text. And then the third one, because there was not a third paragraph, I'm building this. So you can use Array.from not just to make a shallow copy of an iterable object, but you can take things that aren't iterable, turn them into iterable, use them, and combine them with other objects. So you can change the context of something that you're looping to combine and get values from multiple objects to create what is an actual array. With the array, you can then use all the array methods. So I hope that gives you a whole bunch of ideas about what you could possibly do with the Array.from method, as well as a few other things like how to make an object iterable. If you're looking for a copy of this code, you'll find a link to the code just down in the description. If you have questions about this, please feel free to put those in the comments. I answer as many as I have time for. And as always, thanks for watching.